I never imagined a single conversation could change the entire direction of my life, but that's exactly what happened on the morning I walked into my CEO's office. I remember the way my hands trembled slightly as I held the small notebook where I had written all the points I wanted to make. For weeks, I had been working late nights, skipping weekends, and taking on responsibilities far beyond my job description. I believed I had earned the right to ask for something as simple as a 10% raise. It wasn't greed. It wasn't ego. It was survival, appreciation, and respect. And yet, I had no idea that my CEO's reaction would push me toward the biggest decision of my career. The moment I stepped inside his office, I could feel the usual cold air from the oversized AC hitting my face. He was sitting behind his polished glass desk, looking at some documents as if the world beyond those papers didn't exist. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp and impatient, like he already wanted the conversation to end before it had even begun. I tried to smile, pretending I wasn't nervous, but deep down I sensed something was off. Maybe it was the way he leaned back in his chair, or the way his expression shifted from curiosity to boredom within seconds. Still, I pushed through. This was my moment. I spoke clearly, telling him how much I had contributed, how many clients I had secured, and how much revenue my work had brought in. His face remained blank the entire time, as if none of it mattered. When I finally said the words, "I would like to request a 10% raise," there was a pause, one of those long, heavy silences that makes you question everything. Then he laughed. Not a small laugh, not a nervous chuckle. He laughed like I had just told him the funniest joke in the world, leaning back, shaking his head, completely amused. I stood there, frozen, feeling something inside me break. He told me I was already being paid, more than enough. He said people like me should be grateful to even have a job in such a prestigious company. He reminded me that many others would happily accept my position for even less. Every word slipped out of his mouth like he was doing me a favor by letting me work there. The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the way he dismissed my worth, my effort, my time, and the years I had dedicated to helping the company grow. I listened quietly, holding my breath, trying not to let the sting show on my face. When I left his office, something inside me had changed forever. The hallway felt longer than usual, the lights dimmer, and the voices of my co-workers sounded distant. I walked to my desk, sat down, and stared at my computer screen without moving. I kept replaying the moment he laughed at me. That single moment told me more about my future in that company than any performance review ever could. I realized I wasn't valued. I wasn't seen. I wasn't respected. And no matter how hard I worked, people like him would never see my worth unless it benefited them. As hours passed, I felt a strange mix of anger and clarity building inside me. I had spent years sharpening my skills, perfecting my work, and earning the trust of clients. If my CEO couldn't see that, someone else definitely would. And that thought became stronger and stronger until it pushed me into a decision I had always been too afraid to consider. I would leave. But leaving wasn't the boldest part. What truly changed everything was who I chose to work for next. I didn't resign immediately. Instead, I went home and spent the entire night researching companies in the same industry. I looked for opportunities, checked job postings, reached out to old contacts, and tried to understand where my skills could shine without being mocked or minimized. That's when I saw it, the one name that made my heartbeat quicken. The CEO of our biggest rival company. I remembered meeting him once at a corporate event. Unlike my own CEO, he carried himself with calm confidence. He listened before he spoke. He treated people with respect, no matter their role. And the most interesting part? His company had been quietly hiring new talent to strengthen their team and compete more aggressively in the market. It felt like the perfect storm, a door opening right when I needed it the most. The next day, during my lunch break, I found a quiet corner in the parking lot, opened my laptop, and typed an email to the rival CEO's hiring manager. I introduced myself, talked about my experience, and attached samples of my work along with performance numbers. My hands shook as I clicked send. A part of me feared rejection. Another part of me feared that my CEO would somehow find out. But a much stronger part of me felt free for the first time in years. 2 days later, I received a reply. They were impressed. They wanted an interview. And that was the moment I realized that maybe the laughter I heard in my CEO's office wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. something I had been too afraid to believe was possible. When I walked into that rival company's office for the interview, the atmosphere felt different. It was warm, welcoming, and full of life. People smiled at me in the hallway. The receptionist treated me kindly. The hiring manager looked genuinely interested in what I had to say. For the first time, I felt seen. I felt like my work mattered. But what happened next changed everything in a way I could never have predicted. Something that didn't just affect my career, but completely shifted the balance between the two companies. And the moment the rival CEO himself walked into the room, looked directly at me, and asked a question I never saw coming, everything around me froze. Because what he said next would not only shape my future, it would create a storm my former CEO never expected. And I wasn't prepared for the consequences that followed. I felt my pulse in my ears as the rival CEO stepped into the room. The hiring manager stood up immediately, but he motioned for her to sit, keeping his eyes on me as if he already knew who I was. It wasn't intimidating. It was strange, almost like he had been expecting me. He shook my hand firmly, and the first thing I noticed was how calm he seemed. Not the fake calmness that comes from power, but the kind that comes from someone who actually listens before speaking. For a moment, I wondered what he had heard about me, or if my name had ever come up in conversations behind closed doors between the two companies. The industry wasn't that big after all. He asked me to tell him about my work, not just the numbers or the titles, but what I actually did, how I solved problems, how I felt when I created results. No one had ever asked me that in an interview. I talked about the late nights, the complicated projects, the clients who trusted me, and how my own CEO didn't even know half of the things I handled. The rival CEO listened quietly, nodding, occasionally scribbling a note. But the thing that confused me was the way his eyes sharpened when I mentioned the part where my own CEO laughed at my raise request. It was subtle, but I noticed it. He certainly noticed the emotion behind my words. Then he asked the question that froze everything around me. "Before we move forward," he said, tapping his pen on the table, "did your CEO ever treat other employees the same way? Or was it just you?" The room seemed to shrink. I hadn't expected that. I had come here for a job, not to discuss the internal behavior of my former workplace. I hesitated, wondering if he was trying to get insider information for some corporate strategy. But his tone was sincere, curious, almost personal. Still, I knew I couldn't say too much. Talking negatively about a former employer during an interview wasn't professional, no matter how true it was. So I explained lightly, choosing my words carefully. I told him my CEO was demanding, focused on results, and not always expressive with appreciation. I said he had a habit of overlooking employees' contributions. I didn't go deeper, even though there was a lot beneath the surface. He watched me closely, as if he could see the parts one wasn't saying. His expression changed, just a little, like something had clicked in his mind. I didn't know what that meant, but the interview moved on. He asked more about my achievements, my long-term goals, and how I handled pressure. The more we talked, the clearer it became that this place treated talent differently. They weren't just looking for someone who could perform tasks. They wanted people who cared about their work, who grew with the company, who actually felt connected to what they were building. When the interview ended, he thanked me and said they would get back to me soon. I nodded politely, but inside, I was filled with a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. Walking out of the building, I felt lighter. The atmosphere, the people, the respectful tone, it all felt like a new world compared to where I came from. But I also felt a new tension building in my chest, like something big was forming behind the scenes, something I couldn't see yet. The next few days were strange. At my old job, I did my work quietly, avoiding unnecessary conversations. Every time I passed my CEO's office, I felt angry all over again, remembering the sound of his laugh. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if my request had never existed. That only made things worse. I didn't want to be there anymore, but I also didn't want to resign without knowing my next step. I needed security, a stable landing, not another reckless jump. So I waited. On the third day, I received an email from the rival company. They wanted a second meeting. Not an interview, just a conversation with the executive team. My stomach dropped. That wasn't normal. Most companies didn't involve multiple executives before even offering a role. I reread the email twice, trying to understand the tone. It wasn't negative, but it wasn't overly cheerful either. It felt serious. When I walked into their office again, the energy felt different this time. The receptionist recognized me and smiled warmly. They guided me to a different meeting room, bigger, quieter, with a long table and soft lighting. Soon, 3 people entered: the hiring manager, a senior director, and the rival CEO. They all looked focused, but not unfriendly. Something about the room made my heartbeat quicken. The CEO started the conversation gently, thanking me again for coming. Then he said something that made me sit up straight. "We've been observing your work for a while," he said. "Your name has come up more times than you might think." I blinked, confused. My name? At their company? Before I even applied? He continued, explaining how they had seen the results of several projects I worked on, especially those that impacted major clients in the industry. Apparently, my work had been mentioned in meetings because it was affecting the market. Not my name specifically, but the results. And when I applied, they were surprised and curious why someone with my abilities would want to leave a company where they seemed to be doing so well. My throat tightened. I didn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. I had never realized how visible my work actually was. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "People like you don't leave unless something is wrong. And we want to understand what happened." The room went quiet. The hiring manager watched me with concern. The director tapped her pen, lightly, waiting. I felt pressure building inside me, but not the bad kind. It was the pressure of being seen too deeply. I spoke carefully again, avoiding negativity, explaining how I had reached a point where growth wasn't recognized. I said I wanted a place where my work could matter, where I could keep improving, where I wasn't laughed at for asking what I deserved. They listened without interrupting, without judging. But even as I spoke, I sensed the conversation wasn't just about hiring me. Each glance between the executives told me they were thinking about something else too, something connected to the industry, to competition, to strategy. The rival CEO watched me as if he was studying pieces of a puzzle. And I suddenly realized that my story, my experience, and my skills might have more impact than I ever imagined. When the conversation ended, they thanked me again and said they would contact me with their decision soon. But the way they said it had a weight to it, like something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. I walked out of the building feeling both hopeful and unsettled. I kept wondering why they were so invested, why they seemed almost protective of my situation, and what exactly they were planning. It wasn't just a simple job interview anymore. It felt like I had stepped into a story that wasn't fully visible yet. When I went home that evening, I found an unexpected email waiting for me. Not from the rival company. This one was from one of their senior analysts, someone I had never met. The message was short, almost too short. Just one line. "You should know something before you make your decision." And below it was a file attachment. I stared at it for a long time, unsure if I should open it, unsure what it contained, and completely unaware that everything was about to get far more complicated than I ever expected. I stared at the email for what felt like minutes, the cursor blinking on my screen, daring me to open the attachment. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, hesitant. There was a strange chill in the room, and even though it was quiet around me, I felt like I wasn't alone. Curiosity battled caution, but eventually I clicked. The file opened, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. It was a report, detailed, professional, and thorough, about my own projects. Every client interaction, every contract I had closed, every achievement I had thought went unnoticed was laid bare. But it wasn't just a summary of work. It was analysis, comparing my performance against industry benchmarks, showing how much value I had generated for my company, and, subtly, how that value could be leveraged by a competitor. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the numbers and notes. This wasn't ordinary HR tracking. Someone had clearly been watching me for a long time. My first thought was alarm. Had my former CEO known this? Could this put me in trouble? But as I read further, it became clear that the report was meant to entice, not intimidate. Whoever had sent it wanted me to see my own value in a different light. And that's when the realization hit me. My decision to leave wasn't just personal anymore. It was strategic, and suddenly, I felt like a key piece in a larger game I didn't fully understand. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus at my old job. Every project felt heavier because I knew my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about the rival company, about the interview, and about the email. Something inside me was pulling me toward that unknown path, but at the same time, a part of me feared the consequences. I wasn't just walking out of a job, I was stepping into a battlefield I hadn't seen yet, and the stakes were higher than I realized. Meanwhile, back at my former company, things started shifting subtly. My CEO seemed unusually preoccupied, making calls behind closed doors, holding more meetings than usual. Colleagues whispered in hallways, but no one said much to me directly. I got the sense that something was brewing. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. I couldn't be sure if my departure, or even just the rumor of my departure, was causing ripples. It was frustrating, but it also added fuel to the fire. Every ignored email, every cold glance, every subtle underestimation of my skills reminded me why I needed out. As I juggled the pressure at my old job with the uncertainty of the rival company, I started noticing little things in the market. A few clients who had been loyal to my company suddenly seemed restless. There were hints that other employees, quietly dissatisfied, were beginning to explore options. It was like a slow-moving storm building, and I was caught somewhere in the eye. The thought crossed my mind that my move could trigger more than just a career change. It could shift balances in the industry itself. Then one evening, as I was leaving work, I received a call from the rival CEO's office. My stomach tightened. The voice on the line was calm, professional, but there was an urgency underneath it. They requested another meeting, this time in their headquarters downtown. "We need to discuss something important," the assistant said. "It concerns your potential role and the broader strategy we're considering." I hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this about a higher position than I had imagined? Or something even more strategic? Could it involve a client portfolio, a project I wasn't even aware was being observed, or something bigger than just my work performance? I didn't know, but the anticipation made it impossible to sleep that night. When I arrived at their office the next day, the tension was palpable. I was greeted not only by the CEO and hiring manager, but also by two other senior executives I hadn't met before. The CEO spoke first, breaking the silence. "We've been analyzing your work, your approach, and the results you've delivered," he said. "It's clear that someone of your capability can make a significant impact, not just in a role, but in shaping strategy." I nodded, unsure how to respond. This felt different from any interview I had experienced. They weren't selling me a job. They were hinting at influence, at power, at decisions I might never have imagined myself making. Then, the CEO's tone shifted slightly. "But there's more. We also need to be cautious." He leaned back, hands clasped, and his gaze met mine directly. "Your former CEO isn't going to take this lightly. Someone with your skills and knowledge moving to a competitor can create consequences for them, for you, and for the clients who are involved." I felt my stomach twist. I had expected some tension, some rivalry, but hearing it laid out like this made it real. This wasn't just about a raise anymore. This was about strategy, competition, and risk. And the more they spoke, the more I realized that I was not just an employee in transition. I was now a factor in a game with bigger players than I had ever imagined. Over the next few days, I was asked to provide insights on projects I had led without directly transferring confidential information, of course. They wanted to understand processes, challenges, and opportunities from someone with inside knowledge, but framed as guidance, not espionage. It was complicated, delicate, and exciting. Each conversation, each email, each meeting added layers of tension. I felt caught between loyalty to the company I had given years of my life to and the opportunity to step into a world where my skills were genuinely valued. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle signals from my old company. Emails that were once ignored now had sharp responses. Meetings were suddenly scheduled with me that felt more like interrogations than collaborations. I started realizing my former CEO had noticed something, maybe even suspected I was leaning toward leaving. Every glance in the hallway, every curt "good morning," felt loaded with suspicion and challenge. And then, just as I thought I could navigate the situation quietly, an unexpected message arrived. A former colleague, someone I had trusted, reached out late at night. The text was short, cryptic. "Be careful what you share. They're watching. Not everyone is who they seem." I stared at my phone, heart pounding. My world had become a tangle of opportunities and risks, allies and unknown players. Every decision I made now seemed to have multiple layers, some visible, some hidden. The job, the rival company, my former CEO, and even my own instincts were all part of a complex puzzle, and I wasn't sure who would move first, or what would happen when they did. By the time I went to bed that night, I realized the story had completely changed. This wasn't just about a raise, a job, or a laugh in an office anymore. It was about strategy, loyalty, and timing. And somewhere in the shadows, decisions were being made that could either make my career or shatter it completely. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about the possibilities, the players, and the risks. And I knew without a doubt that once I stepped fully into this new path, nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed were some of the longest I had ever experienced. Every phone call, every email, every meeting seemed to carry weight far beyond what I could fully understand. At my old job, the atmosphere had changed entirely. My CEO's usual detached attitude was replaced with sharp attention, like he had suddenly realized I was more than just another employee. Every comment, every glance, every casual remark in passing felt loaded, like he was testing me, trying to gauge how serious I was about leaving, or how dangerous I could be to him and the company. It was unnerving, but I had grown stronger since that laugh, since that single moment that had shaken me to my core. At the rival company, the tension was different but just as intense. I was being included in conversations I would never have imagined myself part of a week ago. Strategy sessions, market analyses, competitor reviews. Everything was discussed with an underlying seriousness, like someone was planning a move I didn't yet see in its entirety. The executives listened closely when I shared insights, nodding and taking notes, sometimes exchanging looks that made me think decisions were being made right in that room based on my words. I felt both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. I had never realized my skills could shift the balance between companies in such a visible way. Then came the turning point, or at least the one that felt like it. A client I had nurtured for years at my former company reached out to me personally. The message was cryptic, almost urgent. "Call me. There's something you need to know before anything moves forward." I didn't recognize the number at first, but the tone was unmistakably serious. I called immediately, and when the line connected, I realized the gravity of the situation. The client hinted at shifts in contracts, subtle threats, and opportunities one hadn't considered. My former company was starting to notice the potential impact of my move, and it wasn't subtle. They were preparing to act. My pulse raced. Suddenly, every step I took felt precarious, like walking a tightrope above a city I didn't fully know. I was juggling loyalty, ambition, survival, and strategy all at once. The rival CEO's office called me in again, this time without a clear explanation. When I arrived, the mood was more serious than ever. They didn't greet me with smiles or small talk. Instead, the CEO simply gestured for me to sit. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a weight in that gaze that made me instinctively straighten up in my chair. "We have a situation developing," he said quietly, "and it involves you directly." I swallowed hard, uncertain what he meant. He didn't elaborate immediately. Instead, he leaned back, steepling his fingers, and watched me like a chess player considering a crucial move. "Your former CEO has noticed the shift in your activity. They are aware of your potential departure. And you need to understand what happens next could change everything in this market." I felt my stomach twist. It was one thing to know my move could affect me professionally. It was another to realize it could ripple across the industry, affecting clients, projects, and even corporate strategies. I had stepped into a game far bigger than myself, and every action carried consequences I wasn't sure I was prepared for. Over the next few days, the tension only escalated. At my old company, I noticed small changes in behavior from colleagues, furtive glances, hushed conversations when I walked by, new procedures implemented quietly. My former CEO began scheduling meetings at odd times, asking questions that seemed unrelated to my daily tasks, yet somehow targeted me. It was clear he was recalibrating his strategy, trying to anticipate my next move. I realized then that the laugh in his office was only the beginning of a much larger story, a story where I had unknowingly become a key player. At the rival company, I was being drawn deeper into confidential discussions. Each meeting revealed new angles, competitive bids, upcoming product launches, client retention strategies. I had access to information that could give me power or put me at risk if mishandled. Every time I left one of those meetings, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I had to be precise, careful, strategic, but also bold enough to act when necessary. Then came the unexpected twist. A former colleague, someone I had trusted deeply, reached out in person, asking to meet at a quiet cafe far from the office. When I arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. She leaned in, whispering urgently, "You have to be careful. Not everything your rival CEO is telling you is what it seems. There are layers to this you can't see yet. And your old CEO, he's planning something that could put you in the middle of a storm." I felt my heart race. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but her tone left no room for doubt. My situation was more dangerous than I had imagined. I realized then that I wasn't just moving companies. I was navigating a web of corporate maneuvering, strategic positioning, and personal stakes that could all explode if mishandled. Back at the rival company, the CEO called me in for yet another meeting. This time, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken urgency. "We need to discuss timing," he said. "Every decision you make in the next few days matters. We need to ensure that your transition, should you choose to make it, is executed carefully, but also strategically. One wrong move could tip the balance in ways we don't want." I nodded, trying to appear calm, but inside, I was a storm of nerves and anticipation. I understood the gravity of what he was saying. My career, my relationships, my future, it all depended on the next few decisions I made. And somewhere in the background, my former CEO was watching, waiting, calculating. Even outside the offices, the tension followed me. Clients contacted me directly, colleagues asked questions with hidden motives, and I began noticing subtle attempts to test my loyalty and intentions. Every interaction had a hidden layer. I realized that the laughter that had sparked this entire chain of events was only the surface. Beneath it lay power plays, personal stakes, and professional battles that could shift fortunes overnight. By the time the weekend came, I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. I had to make decisions, but I couldn't fully predict the consequences. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, emails, and messages from both companies open on my laptop. Every option seemed risky, every step fraught with tension. And yet, I couldn't step back. I couldn't pause. I had to move forward, even if I didn't know what was waiting on the other side. And then it happened. Late that night, a message appeared in my inbox from an unknown sender, encrypted, but unmistakably directed at me. It was brief, only a few words. "Decisions have been made. Watch your next steps carefully. They are closer than you think." I froze, my heart pounding. Who was sending this? My former CEO? The rival company? Or someone else entirely? And what did they mean by closer than you think? I didn't know, but I understood one thing clearly. The climax of the story, the moment where every tension, every risk, every rivalry would collide, was approaching. And when it did, nothing would be the same. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The next days would decide not just my career, but my future in ways I couldn't yet see. I was standing on the edge, the next move critical, the consequences unknown. And somewhere in the shadows, every player was waiting, watching, and preparing. The next morning, I woke up to a new level of tension that I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed before I even opened my eyes, and when I checked it, there was a short video message from an unknown number. My fingers trembled slightly as I tapped play. The video was grainy, taken from what looked like inside my former company. I could see my CEO pacing in his office, speaking on the phone, and then, my jaw dropped. He was holding a file with my name clearly visible on the cover. The message didn't say anything directly, but the implication was clear. He knew something was happening, and he was preparing to act. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't just about me leaving a job anymore. This was corporate warfare. My former CEO wasn't just angry, he was planning, strategizing, and possibly looking to undermine me before I even had a chance to step fully into the rival company. Every instinct screamed that I needed to move carefully, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the opportunity that was waiting on the other side. Before I could process it fully, my email pinged again. It was from the rival CEO's office. The subject line was simple but chilling. Immediate meeting. Urgent update. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed to the office downtown, nerves coiled tight in my chest. When I arrived, the executive team was already gathered, their faces serious, almost tense. The rival CEO didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We have a development," he said, his voice low but firm. "Your former CEO is mobilizing resources in a way that could disrupt not just your transition, but the broader market. We need to decide our strategy before any moves are made. You are central to this plan, but it will require complete discretion." I nodded, but the weight of his words hit me hard. My move was no longer just a career decision. It had become a pivotal moment in a larger battle, one I hadn't even seen coming. And if I misstepped, the consequences could be devastating, not just for me, but for both companies, and even the clients who relied on our work. The CEO pulled up a presentation on the screen, showing charts, timelines, and client contracts. "We've identified potential vulnerabilities," he said, "and we believe your former CEO may attempt to manipulate information or influence key clients to slow your transition. We need your insight on how to anticipate these moves. Every detail you provide is crucial." I swallowed hard, realizing the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about proving my value anymore. It was about navigating a complex web of strategy, deception, and corporate rivalry. Every suggestion I made, every recommendation, could tip the scales in favor of one side, or ignite a confrontation that could spiral out of control. Then the second twist hit me like a punch. One of the senior executives handed me a confidential memo, and as I read it, my stomach dropped. My former company had apparently already contacted some of my closest clients, offering incentives, discounts, and promises designed to make them hesitant about working with me if I transitioned to the rival company. It wasn't just a professional challenge. It was a direct attempt to sabotage my relationships and put me in a position where my credibility could be questioned. I felt a mix of anger and fear, knowing I had to tread carefully. Every conversation, every email, every meeting was now a potential battleground. I had to think 3 steps ahead, anticipate reactions, and navigate loyalty and trust with precision. The tension inside me built, like a storm about to break. That night, as I left the office, I realized my phone had several missed calls. One was from the same former colleague who had warned me earlier. When I answered, her voice was sharp, urgent. "You're not seeing the whole picture," she said. "There's more at play than just the companies. Someone else is influencing decisions behind the scenes. If you move too quickly, it could backfire in ways you can't predict." I ended the call, heart racing. Who else could be involved? How deep did this rivalry go? I had thought the conflict was between 2 CEOs, but now I realized there were unseen forces, hidden alliances, and risks I hadn't even considered. The web of tension had become thicker, and the line between opportunity and danger blurred. Over the next few days, everything intensified. Emails arrived with subtle warnings, phone calls hinted at strategic moves, and meetings were more intense than ever. I was at the center of a conflict that I couldn't fully control. Every decision, even one as small as responding to a client query, could shift the balance, potentially triggering moves from my former CEO I wasn't ready for. And just when I thought the tension couldn't escalate further, a new message appeared on my laptop from the rival CEO himself. "Prepare for immediate action. The window is closing, and the next 48 hours will determine everything. Your role is critical. Be ready." I stared at the screen, frozen. The stakes had escalated beyond my imagination. My career, my reputation, my relationships, and perhaps the market itself were all on the line. Every instinct screamed that the climax was approaching, that every move I made from this point on would either secure everything or set off a chain reaction I couldn't control. I closed my laptop slowly, taking a deep breath. The path ahead was uncertain, the risks enormous, and the suspense unbearable. And somewhere in the shadows, both CEOs, and perhaps others I didn't yet know, were waiting to see how I would act. The tension was at its peak, and I knew that the next moves I made would set the stage for a confrontation that could change everything. The next morning, I arrived at the rival company's headquarters with a mix of determination and nervous energy. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the walls themselves knew something pivotal was about to happen. The CEO greeted me immediately, but there was no small talk, just a pointed look that said everything. "Today," he said, "we move. Are you ready?" I nodded, my stomach tight. I had rehearsed every step, anticipated every question, and weighed every possible risk, but nothing could fully prepare me for the moment I was stepping into. I was no longer just an employee. I was a strategic factor in a battle between two major players in the industry, and the next few hours would determine the trajectory of my career and potentially the balance of power between the companies. The first step was a high-stakes meeting with several key clients who had been approached by my former CEO's company. I was nervous, but the CEO's team had prepared meticulously. As I entered the room, I could feel the weight of expectation on my shoulders. I spoke directly, honestly, and with conviction, presenting solutions, reinforcing trust, and subtly asserting my value without disparaging my former company. The clients responded positively, listening, asking questions, and ultimately nodding in agreement. My heart raced, but inside I felt a growing sense of control. As we left the client meeting, the CEO motioned for me to follow him to a private office. "They're preparing their next move," he said quietly. "Your former CEO isn't just going to sit back. We need to act decisively." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were documents showing client contracts, project timelines, and strategic plans. He looked at me directly. "This is your moment. Use your knowledge wisely, but don't overstep. One wrong move, and it could all collapse." I swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of the moment. I realized then that the laughter in my former CEO's office had been more than just a slight. It had been the spark that ignited a chain of events far bigger than I could have imagined. Every skill, every relationship, every decision I had ever made was coming into focus. I felt both fear and empowerment. The situation escalated quickly. A call came through from one of my former company's top clients, an urgent request to meet immediately. They were clearly reacting to my recent actions and wanted clarity. I knew that any hesitation or misstep could be catastrophic. The rival CEO instructed me to take the lead. I listened carefully, responded calmly, and presented a plan that balanced professionalism with strategic insight. By the end of the conversation, the client was reassured, aligned, and ready to move forward. It felt like a turning point, but the final confrontation was still ahead. That afternoon, the rival CEO arranged a direct meeting with my former CEO, mediated by a neutral third-party consultant. I sat in the room, tense, every nerve alert. Across from me, my former CEO sat with the same sharp eyes, but now there was something different, a mixture of calculation and grudging respect. The meeting began with formalities, but quickly escalated into negotiations, discussions of client loyalty, and acknowledgement of the work I had done. For a moment, it felt surreal. I was no longer an observer, I was the catalyst. Every fact, every insight, every relationship I had built was influencing decisions in real time. The discussion became heated, strategies clashed, and both CEOs realized that my skills and integrity were central to resolving the impasse. At that moment, I understood that the conflict wasn't about a race anymore, it was about trust, recognition, and the value of talent in a competitive industry. Then, just as it seemed the meeting was reaching a resolution, the unexpected twist hit. A message appeared on my phone, an encrypted email I had not seen before. I opened it and my eyes widened. The email contained information showing that a third party, a powerful investor group, had been quietly influencing decisions in both companies, maneuvering contracts and client relationships to their advantage. They had anticipated the rivalry and were prepared to exploit it unless I acted decisively. Suddenly, the conflict had another layer I hadn't considered. It wasn't just the two CEOs anymore. There was an unseen force manipulating the market, and I held the key to navigating it. I took a deep breath, made a quick mental calculation, and presented a solution that accounted for the third-party interference while reinforcing trust between the two CEOs and their clients. The room went silent as my proposal sank in. Slowly, both CEOs nodded, acknowledging not only the practicality of my approach but also the insight and strategic thinking I had brought to the table. By the end of the meeting, the tension had eased, but only slightly. Agreements were made, alliances strengthened, and the immediate crisis was managed. I felt a rush of relief and pride. I had turned a laugh in an office into a turning point in my career, demonstrating value, skill, and courage in a high-stakes environment. But even as I walked out of the building, the email from the unknown sender lingered in my mind. The investor group, the hidden strategies, the subtle moves behind the scenes. It was clear that while I had resolved the main conflict, the game was far from over. I realized that in this world, every victory opened the door to new challenges, and every decision carried consequences beyond what I could yet see. As I stepped into the evening, city lights reflecting off the pavement, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had faced ridicule, risk, and high-stakes corporate rivalry, and emerged stronger, smarter, and more confident. Yet deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. There were still players watching, plans unfolding, and surprises waiting in the shadows. I looked at my phone one last time, the encrypted email still unread in my inbox. I knew that the next move, whenever it came, would be just as critical, just as tense, and perhaps even more dangerous than anything I had faced so far. And with that realization, I understood something important. In this world of corporate power, strategy, and ambition, nothing was ever truly resolved. Not yet. The days after the intense meetings felt surreal. Everything had shifted. My former CEO, my rival CEO, even the clients I had nurtured for years. Everyone seemed to be recalibrating, adjusting to the new balance that had been quietly established. At first, I expected some tension, maybe subtle retaliation, but instead, there was a sense of acknowledgement. My former CEO didn't speak to me much, but the occasional nod in the hallway felt like a silent recognition. He had underestimated me once, but now he couldn't ignore the impact I had made. That moment alone brought a strange sense of closure. At the rival company, life moved quickly, but differently than I had imagined. I was entrusted with responsibilities I hadn't anticipated, but instead of pressure, I felt purpose. I was now part of a team that valued not just my results, but my perspective, creativity, and judgment. Each project allowed me to apply everything I had learned, while also giving me space to grow. For the first time in years, I felt seen, respected, and motivated, not because I was chasing a paycheck, but because my contributions mattered in a meaningful way. The clients I had worried about were loyal, but in a new sense. They respected my professionalism, and many openly acknowledged the difference in approach I had brought to their accounts. Some even expressed relief that my skills were now part of a team where they could be fully utilized, without being diminished or ignored. That was a lesson I carried with me. The value of respect and trust is just as important as the numbers you deliver. The rival CEO invited me to a private meeting one evening, not for a project update or a strategy session, but just to talk. He smiled and said, "I want you to know we chose to invest in you not just because of your skills, but because of your integrity and insight. The way you navigated the last few weeks proved more than your capability, it proved your judgment." I felt a swell of pride, not arrogance, but quiet satisfaction. After everything, the laugh, the doubt, the tension, I had arrived in a place that recognized my worth without undermining it. Even the third-party investor interference, which had seemed so threatening at the peak of the conflict, became manageable. With the rival company's guidance and my own experience, we mitigated potential disruptions and even turned some of the challenges into opportunities. I realized then that conflict, when approached strategically, could be a chance to demonstrate value, adaptability, and resilience. Every unexpected twist, every tense moment had been a lesson that strengthened me for the long run. I also found closure in personal reflection. The laugh in my former CEO's office, the moment that had ignited the whole chain of events, no longer felt like a wound. Instead, it was a turning point. That single dismissive act had forced me to evaluate my worth, my goals, and the environments in which I could thrive. It was a reminder that sometimes, obstacles and humiliations are not the end of a story, but the beginning of a journey toward something greater. The subplots of alliances and hidden agendas gradually resolved as well. The former colleague who had warned me in secret became a close confidant, helping me navigate delicate situations with grace and discretion. The clients I had feared losing became champions of my work, reinforcing trust and loyalty. Even my former CEO, despite initial tension, seemed to recognize the inevitability of change and the limits of his control. By the time weeks passed, the professional landscape had stabilized, with each party understanding their new positions and the consequences of previous actions. I also learned a valuable lesson about timing and strategy. Each move I had made, the research, the emails, the careful conversations, was critical in shaping the outcome. The story wasn't about luck or chance. It was about preparation, insight, and the courage to act decisively when opportunities arose. I realized that in both professional and personal life, the way you respond to setbacks often determines not just the immediate results, but long-term growth and impact. As the dust settled, I took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey. From the moment my request for a 10% raise was laughed at, to stepping into a rival company, navigating high-stakes meetings, managing client relationships, and uncovering hidden influences, the path had been unpredictable and intense. But I had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of my own capabilities. I had learned that respect and recognition are not just given, they are earned and protected through thoughtful action, skill, and integrity. Even the final unexpected twist, the knowledge of the third-party investors, remained a reminder that the business world is layered, complex, and often influenced by unseen forces. But rather than intimidate me, it sharpened my perspective. I understood now that while challenges will always arise, preparation, adaptability, and careful judgment allow you to navigate uncertainty and turn obstacles into opportunities. Looking back, the story became more than just a personal triumph. It became a narrative about understanding one's value, asserting boundaries, and making decisions that align with both skill and integrity. It was about recognizing that setbacks, ridicule, or undervaluation are often not reflections of your worth, but tests of your resilience and judgment. And most importantly, it reminded me that every choice, especially the bold ones, can open doors to growth, opportunity, and respect that were previously unimaginable. By the time I settled into my role fully, I felt a sense of balance and fulfillment I had never known in my previous workplace. The tension, the stakes, the uncertainty, all of it had taught me lessons that extended far beyond the office walls. I had learned to trust my instincts, navigate complexity, and rise to challenges with confidence. And yet, as I sat at my desk one quiet evening, reviewing the week's projects, I received a brief, encrypted message on my phone, just 4 words. Watch closely. They're moving. I smiled faintly, not with fear, but with awareness. I knew that in the world of business, stories never truly end. There would always be new challenges, new twists, and new opportunities. But I also knew that I was ready, that I had learned to navigate the storms, and that I could face whatever came next with clarity, confidence, and skill. In the end, the laugh that had once felt like an insult became a turning point, a catalyst that forced me to recognize my value and step boldly into the future. The conflicts, twists, and high-stakes tension all led to one undeniable truth: knowing your worth, acting decisively, and trusting your judgment can transform challenges into triumphs. And even when unexpected surprises emerge, the lessons learned along the journey prepare you for the next chapter. As the city lights flickered outside my office window, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The story was resolved for now, but the journey had taught me more than any paycheck, promotion, or title ever could. I had discovered that courage, strategy, and integrity are the real measures of success, and that sometimes the boldest step you take is the one that changes everything. And with that, I knew I was ready for whatever the next opportunity or challenge might bring. ChatGPT,